So, if you've ever wanted your money to actually do some good in the world while it grows, you've probably waded into a whole sea of confusing acronyms. The two biggest ones you'll hear, ESG and SRI. And look, they're often thrown around like they're the exact same thing. But are they? No, not at all. Today, we're going to cut right through all that noise and figure out what these two powerful ways of investing are really all about. And just to give you a sense of how big this conversation has gotten, take a look at this number. We are talking about a global, sustainable investing market that's pushing $40 trillion. This is not some little niche movement anymore. This is a massive, fundamental shift in how money moves around the world. So if you want to navigate this space, you've got to speak the language. So yeah, ESG, SRI, what is the real difference between these two giants of ethical finance? That's the big question we're digging into in this explainer. Our whole goal here is to slice right through the jargon and give you a super clear picture of each strategy, so you can see which one, if any, really clicks with your own goals. Okay, let's start with the OG, the original. Socially Responsible Investing, or SRI. You can think of this as the foundation for this whole field. It's basically investing with a moral compass, and it's guided first and foremost by your personal values and your ethics. The most important word to remember for SRI is exclusion. The whole idea is to draw a really firm line in the sand. An SRI investor is basically saying, you know what? I refuse to put my money into companies that are involved in tobacco or weapons or gambling because those things just clash with my personal beliefs. It's a very straightforward, values-first kind of approach. And you might think this is a new idea, but it has been around for a long time. Seriously, it actually goes all the way back to the 18th century, when religious groups started avoiding what they called sin stocks. But it really picked up steam in the 1970s, when it became this powerful tool for social change. You might have heard about the huge movement to divest from companies that were doing business in apartheid-era South Africa. That was SRI in action. Okay, so now let's jump forward to the next evolution of this idea. And that brings us to ESG, the modern data-driven kid on the block. This approach was really popularized back in 2005 by the United Nations, and it shifts the whole focus from a purely moral stance to a much more analytical one. It's way less about exclusion and a whole lot more about integration. And this is where the mindset really changes. The key word for ESG, you guessed it, is integration. So instead of just kicking companies out, ESG integrates all this non-financial data right into the analysis. The goal is to get a much more complete, three-dimensional picture of a company's health. You're trying to spot potential future risks, like, say, new carbon taxes, but also huge opportunities, like a company that's leading the way in renewable energy. So what does ESG actually look at? Well, it breaks down into these three main pillars. You've got E for environmental, that's a company's impact on the planet. Then there's S for social, which looks at how a company treats people, its workers, its customers, the whole community. And finally, G for governance, which is all about how the company is run. Is the leadership transparent? Is it accountable? That kind of thing. All right, time to put them side by side. Probably the best way to think about the difference is with an analogy. SRI, it's kind of like a bouncer at a club with a super strict no-entry list based on moral rules. If you're on the list, you're not getting in, period. ESG, on the other hand, is more like a sports scout who's analyzing every single player's stats to build the strongest, most resilient team for the long run. And that really gets to the heart of it. SRI is subjective. It's all based on your personal definition of what makes a good company. ESG tries to be objective, using hard data and metrics. So at their core, they're asking totally different questions. SRI asks, is this company morally good? But ESG asks, is this company well managed for the risks and opportunities of the future? And here is the perfect real-world example of that difference in action. An ESG strategy might look at an oil company that's pouring money into renewables and has the absolute best carbon capture tech and say, hey, this is a well-managed company that's getting ready for the future. But a strict SRI strategy, it would probably exclude it on principle alone, just because it's in the fossil fuel business. End of story. So like any strategy, there are trade-offs. Let's break them down. For ESG, the big advantage is that it's data-driven. And that gives you the flexibility to invest in companies that are actually trying to get better. The downside? A big one is the lack of standardization across the board, which can lead to greenwashing, where companies look a lot more sustainable than they really are. Now, for SRI, the pro is obvious. It aligns perfectly with your values. It's clean, simple, and morally consistent. The con is that those strict rules can seriously shrink your investment universe, and that might limit your diversification. So, which way is the wind blowing in the market? Well, the data tells a pretty clear story. Between 2016 and 2020, the use of ESG integration just exploded, shooting up by 143%. Meanwhile, traditional SRI screening pretty much stayed flat. This signals a really big shift. It suggests that while people still care a lot about values, more and more investors are demanding hard data to prove that companies are truly managing for a sustainable future, not just avoiding a list of bad industries. Okay, so with all this info, how in the world do you choose the right path for you? Honestly, it all comes down to aligning your investment strategy with what you're trying to achieve, whether your goals are purely financial, purely ethical, or more likely somewhere in the middle. But let's get to the elephant in the room: performance. Do you have to give up returns to invest with your principles? Well, the research for the most part says no. Studies have shown that both ESG and SRI strategies can perform right alongside and sometimes even better than traditional benchmarks. That said, this whole space is still figuring itself out. We've seen some recent debates over standardization cause money to flow out of some ESG funds, which just highlights for growing pains of a field that's expanding so incredibly fast. And these strategies aren't just for you and me, they're used all over the place in all kinds of professions. A financial advisor might use ESG scores, which are almost like credit ratings for sustainability, to manage portfolio risk, but at the same time use SRI screens to help a client who wants to avoid certain industries. A hospital endowment might use SRI to avoid weapons manufacturers, while a university fund might use ESG to make sure its investments have good governance for long-term stability. So we'll leave you with this one big question to think about. When it comes to your money and the impact you want it to have, what's your main driver? Are you drawing a clear moral line in the sand like an SRI investor? Or are you focused on analyzing all the data to find the most resilient and well-managed companies out there, like an ESG investor? There is no single right answer here. But now, you know exactly what question you're asking.